Moving on to item D5, our preliminary budget, I hope.
Yes, and Ms. Gamba has an
Gamba?
update for the board.
Good evening, members of the board and public. Tonight we have some preliminary budget information for you. As in years past, we endeavored to bring the board some summary information prior to the board adoption to discuss some of the big picture items that we're dealing with as we move into our budget. Next slide, please. And we have had a May revision update as of the last board meeting, but just as a reminder to you and also to our public that we still have three major problems in education finance in the state of California. The first is the low level of funding. We're last in the nation in the state of California for funding our schools, and that affects every one of our students in the state of California and certainly those students here in West Contra Costa Unified School District. The second is that we have a volatility in funding. Year-to-year funding levels are totally unpredictable in the state of California. What's predicted in January often doesn't happen in September. What's predicted in November gets changed by January. So it's very difficult to manage a budget during these volatile fiscal times here in the state of California. And then there's just the uncertainty of funding. Estimates of funding are wildly uncertain during these budget planning periods for enactment and beyond. So in spite of our best plans, we often don't have good, accurate numbers from the state of California to deal with. And it appears as though we're going to have all three of these problems until the economic condition of the state improves and we begin to see some expansion of revenues. We have to see state revenues and spending reach some sort of equilibrium for us to see relief in California schools. There has to be a stable, predictable source of ongoing funding for education, and that's absolutely critical. Proposition 98 was supposed to be the help for schools, but in fact we've done worse than the rest of the state budget, both in good times and in bad in the state of California as it relates to Prop 98 funding. So the governor's proposal is running through the legislature. I've learned that they're not having any budget hearings, and I'm not sure whether that's a good or bad thing in the state of California to not have budget hearings, that they're simply moving it to action. And there are still some divergent opinions on what's going to be a part of that budget and what might be vetoed by the governor. There are some real risks. The state budget, according to the governor's proposal, is only balanced if revenues are increased by a future event. And that event is the November election. And education funding, once again in 2012, is the same hot button that it was last year, that mid-year triggers are threatened to our schools based on that future event. This year, the threat is $441 per pupil. For our school districts, that is a $12 million cut that would be implemented mid-year, halfway through our education program. That is a drastic and very difficult situation to deal with. Next slide. Our preliminary budget assumes that we will be successful in our state taxes, that we will be able to see the funding come in for the November initiative that the governor has proposed. So no mid-year triggers are included in the actual revenues and expenses of our budget. But in spite of that, because of the ongoing pressure from the state of California and the continued lack of funding, we're now using fund balance and special reserves to fund our operating budget. We also have a reserve in place in case of mid-year triggers. We're designating $10.6 million of special reserve in this preliminary budget presentation, as well as another $1.4 million in general fund balance to account for that $12 million potential cut.
Can I interrupt you here? Mr. Ramsey, our board president, mentioned the $4 million that we got back from the whole bond, Is that already included in here?
Yes, and I will go over that with you in more detail.
Thank you.
On the next slide, we have our special reserve fund. So what I wanted to do tonight is to make it clear to both the board and to the public what's happening with our special reserve fund. Currently, our special reserve fund today is $10 million. $3.5 million will be added to that special reserve fund based upon the declaratory relief. That was the direction the board gave when the litigation was discussed as a part of our closed session. We are now making that public because it's now public information now that the litigation has concluded.
Excuse me, but Mr. Ramsey said 4 million. You say 3.5.
It's $3.5 million. That's the dollar amount that we will have that has to do with the contract issue. There were legal fees as well that have been being paid out of the general fund this year. Those credits will come back to the general fund this year as opposed to next year, because we paid them out of the general fund this year.
Thank you.
Beginning fund balance for 2012-13 for the special reserve fund will be $13.5 million. Now, we need to use $2.8 million, and that's been in the plan since first interim report, that we were going to use $2.8 million. Now, we're fortunate that we were able to get the 3.5 added to it, because that means that at the end of 12-13, as long as there's no triggers, we would still have $10.6 million in special reserve. So that has helped us keep that special reserve fund whole in case of those mid-year triggers. Next slide, please. In this preliminary budget that I'm presenting to you tonight, K-3 class size reduction is funded through the existing parcel tax at 28-1. Adult education is funded in the same manner that it was funded during 11-12. School resource officers are also in place. Tier 3 funding is in use. That's the resolution that you took last board meeting for the $14.5 million. And we also, I'm sorry that I didn't put this in, I neglected to do that. We do have 4 positions in place for the transitional kindergarten as well. Those are the things that had been on the board's top priority lists. So next slide, please. We have our district's unrestricted preliminary budget based upon the May proposals. So what you see here is the revenues and transfers in and expenses and transfers out. And there's more detail on that in your board packet. I provided you another summary document to look at. Let me just open to that here.
What page is it?
It looks like this on page 115.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And so when you look at the net change in fund balance on the very first column of that spreadsheet, you'll see that it ties out to the summary that I've put on the slideshow, where we're using $3.3 million of the fund balance. Now, the next thing I want you to look at is to move upward 3 figures to interfund transfers in. There's $5.7 million coming into the general fund to help us next year. Can we go to the next slide? I think I have. Yes, here we go. So this outlines it on this next slide, but this is how it ties out. We have $3.3 million of general fund balance that we're using, $2.8 million in special reserve fund. We've got a $900,000 residual fund balance in our long-term debt fund that will be moving over to help pay our COP next year out of the general fund, because we had some residual left after we paid off the state loan. That's a good thing. Then we also have our $1 million coming in from adult ed and our $1 million from deferred maintenance, which was part of your Tier 3 transfer. So all of those things between the interfund transfers in and the deficit spending are what help make up the difference between our revenues and expenses. So you can see that absent those funding sources, we do have a deficit. And we've been talking about that. We talked about it at the second interim report, because you have to sort of take things apart to look at that, because the solutions that we've come up with here in our school district are good solutions, but we have to identify what we're doing exactly, because otherwise we lose track of the fact that we still aren't being funded enough to run our operating program on a year-to-year basis. We're using one-time fund balances that we've grabbed from grant funding. We're using dollars that we've set aside for mid-year triggers, which is good that we did. We made those savings accounts for that purpose. But we are now spending those fund balances down. And this is before mid-year triggers would be enacted. So what I recommend that the board do is to have our preliminary budget become our regular budget, and that we set aside a $12.1 million reserve in case we have mid-year triggers. And I would include, as I did in the previous slide, that $10 million out of your special reserve fund, and then the remaining to be designated in the general fund for mid-year triggers. Now, starting
on the slide, where is that figure on this one?
I believe it's on, find it here. It's on page 3. Mr. Medrano?
Yes.
Where it says designating 10.6 million special reserve and 1.4 million general fund balance reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, beginning with the budget adoption for 2012-13, we are now required to have a multi-year projection that stretches us out to 2014-15. And as I mentioned before, the 2012-13 budget relies on one-time use of reserves. We have to address the deficit spending even if taxes pass. I know that the County Office of Education is going to ask us to turn something in by the first interim report to address the deficit spending. That is their standard for all AB 1200 districts, and that's what we are now. Anytime you have deficit spending in your budget year, you're going to be required to have a comprehensive list of items by first interim that you're going to be able to address that deficit spending in future years, because you can only spend fund balance one time. Now, Tier 3 flexibility continues through June of 2015, so we have that. We don't have to worry about that going away, but we do have to worry about our parcel tax. And so in our multi-year projection, we are going to have to tell the County Office of Education that if we are not successful in renewing a parcel tax, that we will be ready to cut the budgets that are affiliated with that parcel tax. That's a problem in terms of our 2014-15, and I know it's something that we'll be working aggressively to address. Next slide, please. Now, one of the other problems that we have as we begin spending down our fund balance is the fact that the state of California has a cash deferral system that will absolutely require interfund borrowing next year, and potentially other types of borrowing depending on what deferral system gets set in place. Now, the November election, if it's successful, includes sort of a buy down of the deferral. That's what they call it. They're going to try to make us whole, because right now for 2011-12 we are not getting any of our money for February, March, April, May, or June until July and August after the books close. And so we're running a very tight ship in terms of cash in our school district, and we're not going to have to go outside to borrow, but we will have to do some interfund borrowing this year, and the board has already passed a resolution for that before we close our books. Okay? So the point of this cash deferral conversation is to make sure that the board understands that when you spend fund balance, it doesn't mean you have the cash. And so in today's world, it used to mean that, but it doesn't mean that anymore, because the state of California is literally deferring us all the way back from February and not giving us our cash until July and August. So it's a pretty serious situation. I feel that we've done a really good job of trying to sort of smooth things out over the last couple of years. You know, we've taken our Ed Jobs money and we've used it over 2 years. We've taken our ARA money and used it over 2 years. We've worked really hard to identify areas that we can push costs down and yet try to keep as many programs as we can active and in place for our school district. But we're running at a critical juncture now as a school district. This is going to be our first year without a state trustee. I feel that we need to present a solid budget to the County Office of Education with some solid information on how we're going to address our future deficits. It's something we're going to need to work on as a team to accomplish that. With that, I'd be more than happy to take any questions that you have. Our state budget adoption may be as soon as this Friday, and we may learn more about what's happening at that time. We may find out if there's more controversy or less controversy. We anticipate adopting our budget for our school district at the June 27th board meeting, and then of course we'll always be waiting then for that November election as well.
Is there any public comment on this?
There is one person for public comment.
Please come up. Mr. Studdiford.
Good evening, Board. My name is Robert Studdiford. I would like to address you about the budget today. I was with Sherry Gamba and other CBAC members, Tammy Campbell, Eduardo Martinez, and Mr. Medrano at the state budget conference. And it was very alarming to me to watch these officials stand before us and say, well, you know, a couple of years ago we were promising you that you'd have 2007 year funding at 2014. Well, if the governor's budget doesn't pass and we realize the $440 cut that we would get per student, we would be about half of what we got in 2007. And there's no way the state is making this funding up to us. It's very clear to me as you listen to these people talk. One of the points that was made at this conference was the fact that Prop 98 is under a tremendous assault at this time. They're trying to roll it backwards and to lower the rate in which we are to be remunerated. And we still haven't been funded from what Arnold took away from us under that guise. So when I look at the budget, I want to go back to Big Al and his comment tonight. Well, maybe we could have passed the parcel tax as it was. But progress comes in very small steps. 7 cents to 3 cents for a parcels tax was a very small step for the huge incremental advancement it would have given our students. So when I look at some of the things that the state's doing, deferred payments, I'm sorry, I may go over here, but one of the cuts that's not discussed in deferred payments is if the district has to go out and then take a loan to bridge the payment so it can make its payroll tax on time, then we're actually being taxed even further. We're getting cut even more because we have to pay interest on these loans. This is very disturbing to me. And so when I have a newspaper that comes forward and says, Measure K, you're not worth it, I think Mr. Borstein really has to look.
Please conclude your remarks.
I will in just a second. At the value of what education really is and the impact that it has on our budget. And this was a very big one.
Thank you. Board comments?
Okay. So let's start with our newfound $3.5 million that Mr. Ramsey shared with us. If we pull the $3.5 million out of the special reserve, and that would leave us short, wouldn't it?
Well, it would reduce our special reserve fund, certainly.
Yes, it would reduce our, and where would that put us? I guess my question is, with respect to the triggers, because the real purpose of the special reserve fund right now is to protect us in the case of a trigger, right?
That's correct. That's the reason why the board set that special reserve fund aside.
Right. So if the triggers hit, and we would be down to, well, we wouldn't have 10, we'd have...
The triggers are estimated to be $12 million.
Right.
So we're already past the point of having enough in special reserve with the triggers in place. We would then be digging into our ending fund balance in the general fund. And if Dr. Harder, would you mind backing the slide up to page 4, if we back up? Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. To the chart that has the preliminary. There we go.
There it is.
Okay. So we are required to have, in order to pass even the first muster of the county office budget inspection of AB 1200, a 3% reserve. So that's estimated to be $8.6 million at this time for the 12-13 budget.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have a stores and revolving cash fund that has to be set in place for $300,000, and there's a remaining balance then of $9.6 million. So you would have, if you take the $10 million that you have in special reserve at the end of 12-13 after we've already used some of it, and then this $9.8 million, that's the total that you have. Then you'd have to take $12 million off of that.
So it's 19.8 is what you're saying.
Right.
And so I'm going to take 12 out of that.
Right.
So then I'm going to have 7.8.
Right. And that won't be cash. So you will be borrowing money in order to spend any of that. I don't know what the interest rates are at this point for that sort of borrowing. I haven't done that research yet.
Okay.
I hear a suggestion coming from you.
No, what I'm trying to make sure we all understand is what the options are and what the consequences of the options are. Because what Mr. Ramsey suggested, and I'm open, I will just tell you, I'm a person who's open to every suggestion. I am open to every suggestion. But I think you need to understand the implications of them. And if you're going to make an assertive play because, okay, you don't have a trustee and you can do whatever you want to do, you better really understand what you're doing, because you really need to understand the consequences of relying once again on the voters of California to make the ultimate decision, because that's what this is about. That's what this is about. So what I would like us to have when you bring the budget back is a breakout of what our choices really are as we get more and more aggressive. If we decided, for example, we would fund class size reduction next year, which is what we're hearing you, and then nothing passes in November. All right? What have we set our children up for? That's my question. What have we set our children up for? And I think that's a fair question to ask. That's a fair question to ask. I mean, and it would have to be asked in the context of what other political mechanism are we going forward with? Are we going to try something? What is it? Are we going to try? Will we add? All of the many choices I've had. I will just tell you, in the last week I have had. My week has been an endless conversation around this. I'll just tell you, an endless conversation around it. So I want to do something. Which one of the things we're going to do, I'm not sure. But I think that this particular part of the puzzle has to be fleshed out for the board if we're going to make a decision to do anything different than what's already in here.
So what special reserve buys you and what your ending fund balance buys you is a little bit of time. It buys you a little bit of time to be able to work through a crisis situation and set in place the kinds of draconian measures that will be required of this board and this community if the November taxes fail. The November governor's budget also includes, if mid-year triggers are enacted, a reduction to the school year of 15 days. And that's a pretty major step to take. It's also subject to collective bargaining. Collective bargaining doesn't happen quickly. So a $12 million set aside, if the mid-year trigger is that egregious, would get you through June, but would you be able to enact it that quickly? That's the question.
Ms.
Or would you
Gambo,
need additional funding in order to do that?
would you say that more plainly? I mean, I think what you're saying is the impact would be of even reducing the school year means the board would have to look at furloughs and other type of takebacks in the middle of a fiscal year.
That's correct, Mr. Thurman. And we have discussed this, in study sessions. We've discussed this as a part of our budgets. We've talked about it at the May revise. At one point, it was as many as 20 days that the governor had suggested, and so he's backed off that. Now he's saying 15 days between 2 years, between the 12-13 year and the 13-14 year. Nobody is going to be able to enact additional days that quickly. If those days aren't already in place for 12-13, it's going to be very difficult to enact any kinds of reductions that the governor's proposing in 12-13. And so, in my opinion, we're well positioned as a school district having these fund balances available in order to give us the time to sort out what might happen if those November elections fail. But failure to have that plan in place and those reserves just creates more heat on how we're going to deal with the situation. So what the special reserve fund and the fund balance does is it buys you the time to be able to more thoughtfully and thoroughly go through your programs and determine how you're going to run your district absent $12 million when you already have about $6 million in deficit spending. So you're talking about an $18 million situation. And that does not include the reductions that are associated with the fact that the parcel tax cannot be counted in 2014-15 and that those services would already have been acknowledged to be removed. So obviously, as your chief business official, my recommendation is that you hold on to your reserves because if you don't, you're going to be making much larger and more difficult cuts and have to do it much more quickly than you would otherwise have to do.
Any more comments from me? Okay, Mr. Thurman, any comments?
Thank you. I would just ask if it's a small thing, but when we have the summary like the one that's on the screen, if there could be a subtotal at the bottom or an asterisk that just says what all the various reserve funds represent in total, because they're not always on the same sheet, and it was helpful the way you articulated it to really think about it in total, what's available to deal with the possibility of all these triggers. So it's a small thing, but it helps to really think about, where we are. And then I would just ask when we can see the sort of detail almost programmatically before the next board meeting, just to see what the costs represent for all those things that the board is prioritizing, adult education, class size reduction, school resource officers, so we can see the dollar amounts plus the other big ticket items like our cost for health benefits and things of that nature. If we could just have more of the detail to look at that goes into the assumptions of what we saw today. Just one question, two questions really. One is about the K-3 reference here at 28-1. What assumptions is that based on in terms of grade by grade averages, in terms of the ratio? K
through 3 is 28-1.
In all grades.
At 28-1.
So the assumption is all grades.
That's correct. In these numbers that I produced for you.
Gotcha. And then the second question is, has there been any analysis about how realignment of mental health and public safety, mental health really services might impact our district? I read some memos this week about some promises that have been made by the governor to essentially not cap mental health services, and that was a huge victory for people in the mental health community, and it means a lot in terms of how we handle special education services and mental health services. And I wanted to know if there was any analysis on how that impacts us, a dollar amount, and how that might impact us.
That's fairly new information, and we know that we've taken on new mental health services in our school district since last year, actually, and then ongoing increased services next year. What we don't know is how much the county has been spending on the mental health services because the funding had been going to them previously. Now it's coming to us, whether there's a delta there or whether there's something that's actually going to assist us. What it looks to us like is that we're taking on more services that we have to manage, but we are going to get some funding to help offset those costs.
So you think it might be a wash, really?
We really don't know at this point.
Because they're saying that the counties will be given an allocation, current level allocation, and so in terms of us taking on those additional services, maybe it all just sort of nets out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that Mr. Collins works on very carefully and provides us a lot of support in our school district on how we deal with that. I know there were a lot of negotiations last year amongst the county special education teams at all the school districts and how to manage that money and get it back into the district coffers now that we are taking on those responsibilities, and it did not go unchallenged or real easily.
All the mental, you're right, it didn't go easily. All of the mental health associations threatened a lawsuit to say that this is a federal entitlement, meaning Medi-Cal, and essentially the administration conceded on this point to say counties will not be capped. You can't cap it, and will receive their allocation at current year levels. I just saw the memo this week, so I was curious if there had been any analysis.
Yeah, we have been getting some preliminary information on that, but we don't have definitive information as it relates to our particular school district yet. And much like our special education mandate that we serve special education students that has gone unfunded by both federal and state, if you look at for instance, our statement of revenue and expenses, you see a $30 million contribution to restricted program. That is largely special education that has been underfunded by federal and state government. And so it's hard to imagine in the state of California, the budget situation that we're in, that they're going to provide us the level of funding that they should when they're certainly not doing that for the rest of our programs.
And one more thing on class size reduction. What is our current average by grade? I know in kindergarten it's 20. First grade is?
Our kindergarten is 24. That's our staffing level. That's not our average. Our averages are actually lower. I don't have that information with me tonight because what happens when you staff, say at 24-1, what you find is you've got schools that don't have 24 kindergartners and they have a kindergarten class.
It fluctuates.
And so it fluctuates. And then first and second grade we staff at 20-1 for this year, and then third grade was at 28.
Thank you.
Comments?
Yes, I have some questions and comments. So you mentioned earlier that for 13-14 we were okay. It's the 14-15 year that you're really concerned about, right?
I'm concerned about 13-14 as well. Right now I'm working on our multi-year projection, and because we already are coming into 12-13 with a $6 million operating deficit, when you consider what we're picking up from our ending fund balance and from special reserve funds, as I look forward into 13-14, I have to recognize that those funds are now depleted by that amount. And I need those funds to make our reserve funds. And because there's also driven costs. For instance, we still are paying retiree benefit increases. Even though we capped our retiree benefit program, those folks that have already retired, we do have to, keep track of that and have cost increases on that. And next year, that's $1 million for our school district. And in 13-14, it's going to be probably another $1 million on top of it. We just got PERS rates were announced today. There's a 9.6% average increase in our PERS. Sorry, Dr. Harder. I hate to make you have that deep sigh, but it is a fact that we are paying more for our retirees. 9.6% is the average CalPERS rate increase for 2013.
Okay, but in July and August, we'll get our deferred amount, which is the $5 million.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following you.
the deferred money that the state gives us late. For
That's
those
money
funds.
they owe us that we've already
Right.
spent.
We already spent it, so you got to replenish it with the money that we get in August, right?
That's cash. That has to do with the cash flow problem. So that doesn't give us more funding.
No, but it replenishes what you already spent.
It provides the cash for what we already spent.
Right. Okay.
But it doesn't replenish the budget.
Right, but that's included in this?
Yes.
Even though you don't have it yet?
Yes.
Okay. And so what about the interest that, we saved from paying off the loan for 13, 14 for that year? Have you calculated that in here?
Yes.
But it's not shown. I agree with Mr. Thurman.
That was in the long-term debt fund, and we were paying 1.4% interest on that.
Right.
And so we have really that was a very small amount of savings. What we had is, we had a long-term debt fund that had been set aside with dollars from a site sale from many years ago. And so once the dollars that were in that long-term debt fund became roughly equal to the amount that was owed on the state loan, we were able to just transfer that money over and stop paying that payment out of the general fund. And so we had a payment that we no longer had to make out of the general fund.
Right, but we accrued interest on that money, didn't we?
Very minimal. Interest rates are at an all-time low right now.
But that's included in here?
Yes.
And then, we have our special reserve, and then we have our required reserve. So the way you explain it, it looks like in 13, 14, we will be okay. And if the initiative passed, then I see a problem in 14, 15, that you say we still will have a deficit spending.
If the initiative passes, we have deficit spending. The initiative isn't going to bring us more money. It's going to bring us the same that we have now.
The money that's owed to us.
It's going to bring us the same we have now. And the problem with that is we're already deficit spending. We're already deficit spending. So we have a $6 million deficit spending plan, including if we get the money from the November election. So I've already counted that we're getting the money from the November election.
But it's not shown on here. That's what I'm saying. If at our next meeting you could have that really clear so that we'll see exactly where the money's coming from. And if you already spent money that we haven't got yet, just show it that this is the deficit money.
So if you look on, can you bring the slide back up?
Because I'm looking at
Carter?
page 4.
So what we have is the $3.3 million that's in the brackets on this slide.
Yes.
That's the amount of the general fund deficit spending. Then we are also taking, if you go to the next slide, Dr. Harder, here's the list. 2012-13 budget relies on one-time use of revenues. $3.3 million in general fund, $2.8 million in special reserve fund, and $900,000 that we're pulling in from the long-term debt fund that we're now closing because we're no longer going to have that. That was the site sale money. So those are the one-time fund balance revenues that we're going to be using next year to help us pay for our operating program. But the revenues that were on that previous slide assumes that the governor's budget will pass and that we will get the November taxes. I hope that's clear. Thank you.
We can certainly bring that in a greater detail to the presentation for the 27th report, so it's explicit in terms of where those funds are and where that deficit spending is.
Any additional questions, Mr. Marietta? Okay, fine. I echo the concerns of our other board members of being more explicit, show us exactly, where we are. And just repeat once more that the money that Mr. Ramsey mentioned, it's already included. And just repeat that because people will forget. They'll leave here and go, we've got an extra $2 million out there. What are you doing with it? Just say it very clearly. It's already accounted for here. So that's important. Okay? That's key. So we know now if the governor's budget fails, we're into $12 million cut.
$12 million in mid-year trigger cuts in addition to the $6 million deficit.
Yeah. So at this present point in time, where we're looking at it, we have the money to cover that.
That's correct. So my point
But
was
nothing
that buys you the time then to
Yeah.
plan for 13, 14.
Those will be the difficult years.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Entertain a motion to accept the preliminary budget.
So this is on just for information,
Just for
Mr. Medrano.
Okay. Any further questions from anyone? None? Okay, moving on then. For right now, I'm going to skip